Coming to you from the shores of gorgeous Lake Michigan, welcome to the National Writers Series. Celebrating 15 years as a year-round book festival. We are the premier home for passionate readers who love inspiring conversations with best-selling and award-winning authors. Tonight, we welcome decorated U.S. Navy fighter pilot Lieutenant Kegan SMURF Gill. In his debut memoir, Phoenix Revival, Gill shares his story of surviving the fastest ejection in naval aviation history. Phoenix Revival depicts the harrowing details of his physical recovery, the emotional toll of over a dozen surgeries, and his battles with prescription drug addiction and undiagnosed brain trauma. Gill is a local author from Elk Rapids, Michigan. Since his accident, he has become an advocate for veteran mental health, an ultra-endurance athlete, and a public speaker inspiring others to rise from their darkest moments. Lieutenant Kegan Gill will be joined by our guest host, Ron Jolly. Jolly is an award-winning journalist, broadcaster, and author who has been a voice in northern Michigan media for over 3 decades. Best known for his long-running morning show on WTCM News Talk 580, Ron has interviewed thousands of guests, from governors and senators to local heroes and national authors. The National Writers Series salutes our amazing audiences, dedicated volunteers, and generous supporters for helping us raise the next generation of readers and writers through our free education programs across the region. This season of amazing authors is made possible through major support by the Green Brick Foundation, Northgard Technology Group, Golden Fowler Home Furnishings, Prout Financial, and Ward and Mary Bevins Gillette. Tonight's book champion is M22. Tonight's event is underwritten by Brick Wheels. And our community running sponsor is TC Track Club. Tonight's live streaming is exclusively underwritten by Nancy Davey. Thanks to our major media sponsor, the Traverse City Record Eagle, and our media partner, Interlochen Public Radio. For information on future events, programs, and how to support our nonprofit work, please visit nationalwritersseries.org. Now, please welcome to the stage #1 New York Times bestselling author, Doug Stanton.
Hi, everybody. Oh. Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm very brief up here. That was a great introduction. Thank you, Kendall, who's our marketing, Kendall Kocher. I just want to tell you quickly, I'm Doug Stanton. I'll be talking with Adriana Trigiani July 16th at the Opera House. If you're a fan of her work, she's a delightful person, and that too will be a great show. But tonight we have something very, very special with the Kegan Gill and Ron Jolly. I just want to add, if you are in the world of corporate, the corporate world or business or leadership, mentoring, I highly recommend you get in touch with Kegan because he's a wonderful public speaker and he can speak directly to your clients, to your customers, and his message is very resonant and it's transformative as his life and his journey has been. Thank you for being here. It's a wonderful crowd, and please now welcome to the stage Kegan and Ron Jolly.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for turning out tonight. Kegan, thank you for being here. Thanks to the Writer Series for inviting me to have this honor to talk to Kegan for a little while. So, how did you get your nickname? No, I'm not. We'll get into that later.
Get into that. Jumping right in.
As a reference point, and if you have not read the book, I highly recommend it. This guy can fly a jet fighter and write. So, read the book. We'll go over some of the highlights tonight, but as a reference point, we'll go before and after the crash. So you're flying an FA-18 Hornet. Is that what the Blue Angels fly when they come here to Traverse City?
Yes, that's correct. It's they've just transitioned over to the Super Hornet, which is the same model that I flew.
So he's flying one of those.
Except a gray one, not a blue one.
A gray one. What year, where were you, and what kind of mission or training were you involved in, and what happened?
So January 15th, 2014, I was a 28-year-old Navy strike fighter pilot living my dream at the controls of an F-18 Super Hornet, an $89 million aircraft. So you can imagine that's a lot of responsibility for some 20-something kid with a baby face. But I'm out on this mission. We did some air-to-air refueling where you fly up behind another jet. that puts out a basket behind it, and you put out a little probe on the front of the jet, and you fly right up and plug into it. And so we did this several times for proficiency. That all went smoothly. And with some extra fuel and airspace, we broke away, just me and one other jet, to practice air combat maneuvering. And this is probably what people think of when they think the epitome of a fighter pilot is bending the jet around at the edge of its capabilities, pulling Gs, operating weapon systems, defensive systems, radar, bending your neck around. Extremely dynamic, but one of my absolute most favorite things that we got to do in the jet. But just like any really high technical skill like that, it takes a lot of practice to get good at it and get proficient. So we were out practicing to sharpen that blade. And we had done several rounds of this fighting throughout the day, and we were just about out of fuel. We hit what's called...
Where were you, by the way?
We were 50 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach, Virginia, over the open Atlantic Ocean. And it just so happened on this day, the air temp was at below freezing with wind. The water temp was at 37 degrees Fahrenheit at the nearby buoy, so nearly freezing water temps. And they had also, we had been joking in the ready room right before the flight that there was a great white shark. It was one of the largest white sharks that has ever been GPS tagged. And my buddy, because we always like to mess with each other, right before this flight says, hey, today would be a terrible day to eject. There's a 16-foot, 3,500-pound great white shark named Mary Lee right underneath your airspace. So all that was kind of put in the back of my mind as we laugh it off, as we often do, with the morbid sense of humor that is required to survive in that stressful environment. And now I'm over that same piece of airspace, shark circling below, just waiting for me. And we kicked off another round of fighting. So we did what's called an abeam set, which is where we are basically flying alongside each other, about a mile abeam. And we were at 12,500 feet when we started the fight, which is over 2 miles straight up in the sky. So the ground wasn't an immediate concern. And as he called the fights on, we each pushed the throttle up, pitched the jets in like a couple medieval knights in a jousting match at high speed. And we came to what's called the merge, where we crossed paths. Now, my jet was already partially inverted and nose low, so pointed at the ocean slightly. So I just opted to roll the jet fully inverted and pull down towards the ocean. Typically, this is a maneuver that would take about 5,000 feet of airspace in the Super Hornet. However, there are some factors that cause that turn radius to grow significantly. I had just gotten qualified with what's called the Jehemix helmet. It's this really cool piece of kit. It's a helmet, but everywhere you look, your weapon systems and symbology all follows with you. And just like any technical piece of gear like that, it takes practice before it becomes intuitive. And I wasn't quite at the point where it was intuitive. I was fully qualified, yet not quite proficient. So I was just distracted for just a split second. You can imagine how fast things happen in a jet at that speed.
At what speed are you going at that point?
At this point, I'm over 500 knots at the merge, and I roll the jet inverted and pull. And I had plenty of altitude, but I didn't quite realize the airspeed I had gotten up to. Now, if it was just the airspeed, I would have been all right. However, as I pointed straight down at the ocean, I've got the stick all the way in my lap. I'm pulling as hard as I can. I've got about 7.5 Gs on my body. So you can imagine just my head and helmet, say that weighs about 20 pounds, just sitting here at 1 G. Now that's like having a 150-plus pound person just on your head. And you're looking up and craning your neck. So you can feel the force in your head, your neck, your upper body, just crushing you. My whole body with my gear is over 1,600 pounds at this point. So I can feel that very viscerally. And now all of a sudden I have that stick in my lap, I'm pointed straight at the ocean, and all of a sudden I just feel the jet ease. It's not turning anymore. And very quickly I hear the radar altimeter blare. Altitude, altitude, meaning I'm going through the 5,000-foot hard deck, which is a big training rule violation, a big no-no. But very quickly my problems became even larger. With the stick still in my lap, in just desperation, I pulled the throttle to idle, extended the speed brake, trying to slow down what I could, but it was too little too late. In 2 seconds from impact at 51 degrees nose low, going 695 miles per hour, I yanked that ejection handle. And I then found out the human body is not aerodynamic at the speed of sound. And hitting that explosive force of air was 100 times the force of a Category 1 hurricane, all instantaneous. You can imagine sticking your arm out the car window going down the road at, say, 70 miles per hour, how forceful that is. Well, when you're going almost 700 miles per hour, that parasitic drag force is exponentially stronger. So it just completely ragdolled my body. As I exited the aircraft, you get a 50G instantaneous boost to the rocket seat after you pull the ejection handle. That compresses your spine permanently oftentimes. People will lose approximately an inch off their stature. That then eases to a 12 to 14G sustained rocket boost, and then I hit that airflow. And the airflow ripped my helmet right off my head, caused traumatic brain injury. My neck snapped my C1, the top vertebrae. My left scapula shattered as my arms and legs ragdolled violently. Shattered both my upper arms, both my lower legs. I had internal artery damage, nerve damage. And fortunately, that parachute, in just the seconds that I had from impact, deployed and slowed me enough so I didn't die in impact with the ocean. Then I plummeted into that icy cold, churning Atlantic swell with Mary Lee down there circling around as I'm bleeding out. And things went from bad to worse as that parachute that had just saved my life then sunk underneath the surface and started to drag me under. And for anybody who's ever been held underwater when you need a breath of air and you can't get it, you know how terrible that feeling is. And it was just that again and again and again.
So you have all these broken bones and all this trauma, and now you're in the ocean, and you're being pulled under by the parachute.
Correct.
Were you conscious?
I was in and out of consciousness. I lost linear memory at the point of pulling the ejection handle. But over the course of years, I suffered from night terrors and flashbacks of being in the water. I think my subconscious has largely tried to push that away, but there's still some of it that would bubble up on occasion.
So that's the crash. That's the ejection. Is that a kind of a record for the fastest speed where a pilot has ejected?
It's the fastest survived ejection in naval aviation history. There's a faster Air Force pilot, call sign Noodle, that ejected back in 1989 at just slightly over that speed. I think he was closer to 800 miles per hour.
So you're semi-conscious or in and out of consciousness. You have a bunch of broken bones. You're in the ice cold water. Your parachute's pulling you down. There's a shark out there somewhere. And we'll come back to this, but that's the reference point. How did you avoid drowning, though, if the parachute's pulling you down? And why did that happen?
So fortunately, I had a life preserver unit, which automatically inflated upon impacting the ocean. And that gave me enough flotation that my head could bob to the surface on occasion and get a gasp of air. However, I had a malfunction in what's called the SMURFs, which are the saltwater activated explosive devices that connect the harness to the parachute riser. Now, like a lot of the gear in the military, we have some pretty antiquated stuff that we operate with, and it doesn't always work how it's supposed to. And unfortunately, both of those charges in the SMURFs didn't fire. Well, I believe one fired but didn't disconnect, and the other one didn't fire at all. So I remained trapped to the parachute. And the whole reason that you have these is because upper body injuries are so common in high-speed jet ejections that oftentimes the pilot can't reach up and manually disconnect. And that was absolutely the case for me because I had, not only were my arms shattered, but I also had some of the nerves damaged and severed, so I had no function in my upper body.
How long before you were pulled out of the water, and how were you rescued? How did they get word to Coast Guard or whomever rescued you?
Yeah, it was truly miraculous that they were able to rescue me with everything that had gone wrong. I mean, at this point, my parachute had failed to disconnect. All of my survival gear had ripped off of my vest when I ejected, so I had no signaling equipment. My beacon had malfunctioned. Fortunately, my flight lead, when he saw my parachute open, realized something was wrong. And in just the fumes that he had left in his aircraft, he was able to go and spot a fishing vessel about a mile from our position. He dropped a GPS mark of my position, which was now quickly changing with the current of the ocean. But in that quick thinking, he saw this other vessel, got down really low and really fast and thumped over their bow to get their attention. So you can imagine a Super Hornet coming over you about the height of this roof. Like, that's going to get your attention quick. And they switched over to Maritime Guard so that they were able to figure out what's going on. Why is this jet bombing over us? But he was able to direct them over to my position. And they weren't able to get me out of the water, but they at least provided a rough visual location where I was at. Had that fishing vessel not been there and had my flight lead not done this the way he did, I would have drifted off to sea, because all I was a little tiny dark head spending a majority of my time underneath the surface of the churning ocean, and no one would ever see me again.
So it really is a miracle that you're here, period, let alone walking, let alone an endurance athlete now. Many miracles happened. Well, not all miracles. A lot of it's due to your self-determination and
Definitely some
fortitude.
miracles in there.
So that's our reference point, the crash, the ejection. Let's go back to how you became a Navy fighter pilot. That's something, kids and young people all across the country dream about. When did you get that dream? How did you get into aviation? When did you get the aviation bug?
So when I was about 10 or 11 years old, my parents had a friend that had a little Cessna, just a little single-engine flying lawnmower, and I got to go up and fly that thing, and it was like flying a rocket ship for a little kid. I mean, we're climbing out at barely 500 feet per minute, which for non-pilots, that's very slow. But as a little kid, it just felt like we were going straight up into the sky. And that kind of stuck with me. And then my parents enrolled me at NMC's. They do a summer program for kids, and they still do it to this day, where they take kids. You do about a week of ground school, learning the basics of aerodynamics and weather and some sort of basic aviation information. And then at the capstone of the week is you get to go up and fly a little Cessna around over the beautiful turquoise blues of northern Michigan. And that absolutely, had me sold. Just getting to be up in the sky and have that perspective. So when I graduated high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I remember that flight program, and it's right here in NMC. And so it made it really easy for me to transition. And I started the aviation program.
Well, so did you get your license then at NMC?
I did.
Okay.
By the time I was a junior, as I went to the University Center to finish a 4-year degree through NMC, but by the time I was a junior, I was a certified flight instructor, a CFI, CFII, and I was teaching people to fly and building hours and getting paid for it. And I ended up graduating with my bachelor's degree, and I had actually one of my students hired me. A gentleman named Larry Poneman.
I know Larry, yeah.
He has a privacy consultation firm. He's got like a think tank. He's one of the most brilliant human beings alive. I think he's got like 4 PhDs. And he ended up hiring me to fly for his company. So we ended up flying. He bought a brand new Mooney Acclaim, which is like a really nice, it's like the Ferrari of general aviation. Glass panel avionics, integrated autopilot, Bose headsets. Like, this was good living for some young 20-year-old kid. And we flew all over the country over the course of that year, ate a lot of really good food that I didn't have to pay for. And it was a great gig, but after a year of doing that, I kind of had an itch for something more. And so I had a friend who was applying to go to Navy OCS named Mark Hall. He was a flight instructor with me at NMC. He said, yeah, you should think about putting in a package to OCS. And I was like, what's that?
What's that, officer? What is that?
Officer Candidate School. At the time, I thought your dad had to be an admiral. You had to go to the Naval Academy. Like, there was no path. There's no way some community college kid from Traverse City can go fly fighter jets. But he corrected me, and he said, no, you should go check out this website called Air Warriors. And he kind of pointed me in the right direction. And a few months later, I was picked up by OCS and headed to Newport, Rhode Island.
So, the local connection, Traverse City guy, Traverse City High School, the NMC Youth Aviation Program, Flight School. You work there. Larry Poneman is local, the guy that you mentioned, and you get that job. One other local connection, if anybody got a free book tonight, we can thank M22 that's here tonight. There you go. And you're a guy that was bitten by the aviation bug. You're an adventure guy, a risk taker. What's your connection with M22? How did they affect you when you were in Traverse City?
So my friend Max Johnson, who's also in Traverse City, we grew up together. His mom had won through the local newspaper, I think it was the Record Eagle, had put out a couple free tickets to do lessons with Bronia kiteboarding. And he knew I was like an adrenaline junkie kind of guy. And so he called me up and he said, hey, you want to go do this kiteboarding thing? I was like, absolutely. Because I had seen it. It looked so cool. And so we went and met up with Matt and Kegan. We went down to Tobago, to the kite spot there, and did 2 days of lessons with them. And I was hooked after the first 2 days, but I was broke, in college. I was waiting tables. And so I went into the shop and I asked Matt and Kegan, like, hey, do you guys got any like old gear kicking around the shop? And I bought like the most sketchy old sea kite, like no D-power, no safety. I got a harness. I couldn't even afford a board yet, but I at least just got that thing up. And at this point, I was living out on Deepwater Point. And so almost every day before work, I'd be out there getting drug around by this kite, getting tangled in people's sailboat masts and like just all around just disasters day after day. But little by little, I start to get the hang of it. My parents got me a board for my birthday, and pretty soon I was out there kiting. And these guys would see that little blue kite scooting along when they're taking people out to the lessons. And the next summer, I went into the shop. I was like, hey, you guys need any coaches? And at this point, I was a flight instructor, so I had like a little bit of coaching, instructor experience, and they picked me up. And I spent the next few summers working with them. I was flight instructing and then instructing kiteboarding lessons on the weekends.
And Matt will show up later in the story, too, a couple of times in the book. So, and as you read the book and get to hear Kegan's story and learn more about him, you had this confidence, this built-in confidence. I don't know if you ever had self-doubt, but you learned to fly. You said, well, I'll become a flight instructor. I'll take this job and fly this guy around the country. Oh, I can go to officer candidate school. I think I'll be a fighter pilot. I'll figure out how to do the parasailing?
Kiteboarding.
Yeah, kiteboarding, thank you. Where does that come from? Because I know you talk to audiences about that. Are you born with that? Did you get that from your parents? Where do you get that determination and confidence that, a lot of people have self-doubt and might not have taken some of the steps you have?
Yeah, oddly enough, I think it comes from a place of insecurity as a young kid. I mean, I was kind of a scrappy little kid that would get beat up, and through that I learned to fight and stand up for myself. And so I had this fire instilled in me at a very young age, which was kind of being the underdog and proving people wrong. Had become, I guess, a bit of a personality complex, at a certain point in my life. But I think through that, I was always in this state where, like, people tell me something's impossible, and that just makes me want to pursue it.
So you did. So you went to you got into officer candidate school. I mean, the challenges to me just seem insurmountable, just from an academic standpoint. There's a lot of technical studying that you have to do that you're tested on, and of course the actual flight skills. What were some of the big challenges that you overcame to become an actual fighter pilot, a Top Gun fighter pilot?
So there is, a tremendous amount of stress put on you. I mean, initially you show up at officer candidate school, and there's a bit of a physical grind and mental grind where you're sleep deprived and you're physically kind of run down and still having to function and take tests academically. And then it's kind of this building block approach as it continues to hone your skill and hone your ability to handle stress and more knowledge. And as you move up through the pipeline of that training curriculum, they do a really good job of building you up to be what you need to be. But initially, it's very academic focused. A big struggle that happened when I was going through the initial academic phase of flight school was they had a funding change. So they had all these student naval aviators piled up in Pensacola waiting to start the flight program. And because of a funding change, they were no longer able to afford to put through all the student naval aviators that they had. So they started to think of creative ways to thin out the herd. And normally, when you go down to API, is what it's called, Aviation Pre-Flight Indoctrination in Pensacola, it's typically like a cakewalk. You just got to get an 80 on all the tests. Most of the people using it as like a drinking evolution in downtown Pensacola and spend all their new 01 ensign officer pay quicker than they can earn it. But for us, that turned very different very quickly when they announced that they were going to raise all the grading standard up. And that continued to climb and climb. And by the time I classed up, you had to get a 95% average on every single test. And, while getting an 80 would be pretty easy, to get a 95 on every single test was like, you actually had to buckle down and study pretty hard. But people started dropping like flies. Shortly after I had classed up, they got so desperate that they actually all the ensigns would have to muster in our khaki uniforms every morning before we classed up. And they had everybody in an auditorium, a similar size to this one actually, and they'd say, all right, everyone look under your seat. And anybody who had a pink envelope was basically dismissed from flight training. So we call it Nightmare Oprah Day. But there were a lot of crushed souls. So there was some luck involved in getting through the pipeline. There was also a lot of hard work.
A lot of hard work to just get those grades, to make it. What was it like? Like, what kind of word did you get when they said, you get your wings? You're now a Top Gun fighter pilot.
Yeah, I wasn't a Top Gun instructor. I didn't go to Top Gun, but just to clarify for any Top Gun instructors that are out there listening, grinding their teeth right now, because they're serious Type A personalities. So just to clarify and set the record straight. No, I ended up doing flight training. Took about 3 years, I think, before I earned my wings from when I had started. And through that, you're training in initially small aircraft called the T-38, or correction, T-34 Charlie Turbo Mentor, a little turbine prop plane. And you know, the academics are challenging, but what's much more challenging and complex is the practical application of knowledge that you read in the book and bring it into the aircraft. Which, you know, a lot of people can take tests. You know, we had people that had already become doctors in their previous career before they went to flight school, so they were very academically sound. But it's a whole different thing when you have to apply that knowledge practically. Fly an aircraft, talk on the radio, you know, you're kind of juggling these skills. Fortunately, I had an aviation background, which definitely helped in some regard going through that flight training. But in other ways, it crippled me because I had to relearn how to do everything the Navy's way, which made some of it more challenging. But I ended up completing that training, selecting advanced jet training, which is with the T-45 Goshawk, and did another year of training in Kingsville, Texas. So there were definitely evolutions to that, but once I graduated that T-45 training, I was officially a naval aviator. So I got my wings on my chest, and at this point you're like, yeah, I made it. Yeah. And then you show up to VFA 106, the training squadron for the F-18, and you realize that nobody gives a crap about your wings. You don't know anything yet, and you really don't.
You have to go through a whole other regimen of learning how to fly the FA-18.
Yeah, it's kind of like you've learned how to run and jump, and then they just throw you into the NFL. Yeah. And you got to figure out all that other stuff.
It's a good analogy. So one other note before we get to the post-crash here, though, that I remembered, because we talk about hard work, discipline that you had as a young person, and preparation. When you were going off to, was it boot camp? I don't know how old you were, but you were leaving Traverse City, I guess, to go to boot camp up in the Northeast, I think. And what did you do instead of just showing up? What did you do to get ready, and how did it benefit you compared to some of the other guys?
Yeah, I've always been the opposite of procrastinator for most of my life, and so I used that same mindset in preparation for going into the military. And I joined a local CrossFit gym here called Leading Edge Fitness. I don't think they're around anymore, run by a former Marine, Billy G, this big burly dude, and he just whooped my ass for about 3 months straight. But I put on about 20 pounds of lean muscle, and I was physically maybe the most fit I've ever been in my life before. Another thing I did was I went in the first M22 challenge that Matt and Kegan put on, and I think I was 6th overall. So I did really well. There was like a MARSOC Marine I beat, and the folks that I was with in that front pack were professional athletes, collegiate athletes, Olympians. Like, there were some really incredible athletes in that race, but I was, preparing myself for what was to come.
And that gave you an edge in boot camp and ultimately your quest to become a fighter pilot because you prepared.
It did.
And
I continued that physical training in the military to be ready for anything, and it saved my life that I was physically fit when I ejected. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here to talk to you.
So, Traverse City start, gets into the Navy, becomes the fighter pilot. How many years did you fly, or how many missions or training hours, however you keep track of it, between the fighter jets before the ejection?
So I had completed about 3 years of flight training plus a year at the F-18 training squadron, and then I had been in my first fleet squadron for just shy of a year on that day in January when I ejected. So in the big picture of naval aviation, I was still a pretty young pilot, although having already completed 4.5 years of flying for the military. Plus, you know, before I even went in the military, I had 1,300 hours of flight experience in general aviation.
All right, so you're in a hospital bed. There's a photo I think we saw with the opening video. You've got your arms held together with some kind of structure and the pipes and wires in and out of you. And as I recall, the doctor or nurse or somebody said, "You're not going to walk again." Is that right?
Yeah, I had been in a coma for 2 weeks, and when the lights started to come on, it was like, where am I? It was like waking up in your own bedroom, except there were all these people around me, and there were these bright lights and these beeping machines, and why can't I move? Why are my arms and legs vacuum sealed in plastic wrap? But between the head injury and all the meds they had me on, I was pretty pleasant no matter what was going on at that point. And I didn't fully realize, I couldn't even comprehend mentally what was going on. But eventually the medical staff came in and they just laid it out. I think they were just trying to be very real with me. Hey, you've been in a high-speed ejection. You're lucky to be alive. However, the prognosis is grim. We don't think you're going to be able to walk again or use your arms. You've broken your neck. You have extensive nerve injury in your extremities. We've salvaged your limbs through, from amputation, preventing it with fasciotomies. We've reconnected your brachial artery, but you still have a lot of nerve damage throughout your body, and we just want to let you know. And in this moment, there's this overwhelming darkness, like, of things kind of starting to click, like, oh, I just crashed an $89 million fighter jet that I might be responsible for since I signed for it. My career might be over. My physical body is destroyed. And my future was looking bleak. And I found myself in this very dark corner where I could have very easily just been consumed by that. Yeah. And I could have keep popping the oxy and having them, hit the PCM, the patient-controlled meds with the fentanyl or whatever they're giving me, Dilaudid, all the good stuff, and just kind of gone down that path and never come back out of it. And I honestly think there was an expectation that was my pathway forward, was, hey, this guy's done. But also in that moment, there was this little spark that maybe came from my childhood of getting beat up, which was, you want to tell me I can't do something? I'm going to prove you wrong. And so that became my mission every day. And I started to feed that little tiny ember of hope. And as I fed that ember, not just through visualizing where I wanted to be, seeing myself back in the jet, which was the seed that I planted, but then I took action daily through discipline, through consistent effort towards my workout, which was at first like, I can't even move, but maybe today I can wiggle something. And that progressed day by day and kept me driving forward. And the more I fed that little ember, it grew, and that light kind of diminished the darkness with time.
Little baby steps. When you sat up in your bed one day, I think the medical staff was shocked to see you sitting there as opposed to lying down.
They were.
Yeah.
And I couldn't use my arms or legs, but I had somehow managed to, like, jellyfish my body. I don't know what you'd call that.
How many rods and screws and plates do you have in your body now from that ejection?
So I have a titanium rod in each of my upper arms with screws. I have a steel surgical grade plate in my left forearm, and then both my tibia have titanium rods and screws in them. So I've got like a legitimate Wolverine X-ray now.
So that's amazing. We'll skip way ahead. People realize what shape you're in and what they said. And after you spent a lot of time in the hospital and rehab and that, and you discovered some alternative medicines, I guess we'll say, you actually competed in was it the 4x4x48? So
Yeah.
remember, with all that wrong with him, and when was that? And what's the 4x4x48?
So the 4x4x48 challenge is from the minds of David Goggins, for anybody who's familiar. He's a former Navy SEAL that just does incredible feats of strength. He'll like go run around the planet, kind of stuff. And he put together this challenge, which was you have to run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours straight. And this is actually, this is after I'd been dealing with some serious mental health issues. I was in a really dark place. And it was the first time that I ever reached out publicly about or told my story whatsoever. And what I ended up doing was there was a fundraiser for this event. And I put maybe a page-long explanation of what I had been through. And I posted this on their website for the fundraiser. And I was just thinking, like, nobody's going to care. I didn't even have social media at the time, but I sent out a few emails to close friends and text messages. And within a week, I had raised almost $10,000 for that fundraiser. And so the organization, the nonprofit that was running the challenge event, called me up on the phone, like, hey, you want to come down to Texas and run it with us? I was like, absolutely.
And at that point, you had a bad leg, didn't you? Didn't you limp at that point?
Yeah, I had pretty extensive physical injuries and still dealing with some pretty heavy mental incapacitation.
And you did it.
Yeah, I completed the full
4 miles
48
every
miles.
4 hours for 48 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, but before that now, so you're in the hospital, a VA hospital. Is it a VA hospital right after the crash?
No, initially I was in a level 1 trauma center in Norfolk,
yeah.
Norfolk General. I was then transferred to the ICU at Naval Hospital Portsmouth, which is nearby. And that's where I initially came to and started doing my initial rehabilitation. But shortly thereafter, I was transferred to Richmond, Virginia, VA Inpatient Polytrauma Center, which was just all day, every day, doing every kind of physical rehabilitation I could. It was occupational therapy, physical therapy, vision therapy, speech therapy, aqua therapy, recreation, like every therapy there is basically in the conventional world, I was doing it there.
What about the painkillers and the drugs? At that point when you're in the rehab there doing all the therapy, were you still taking prescription drugs?
Oh yeah, I mean that was the go-to. When you actually got to see the head doc, it was really just what prescription can I write you today? While the therapies were very helpful, the kind of over-medication in the veteran community is sort of notorious, but at that point it was oxycodone, OxyContin, tramadol, trazodone, amitriptyline, and massive doses of a medication called gabapentin that were supposed to be much less dangerous than oxycodone, but it turns out that was one of the most miserable drugs for me to get off of.
I said all those, many of those addictive.
Yes.
Yeah, very addictive.
Yeah, and I think gabapentin, I don't know if it still is, but it was definitely labeled as a non-addictive substance.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, as someone who went through terrible withdrawals from that med, it is very addictive.
So you're going through the rehab, you're taking the addictive painkillers, and that's for your physical injuries. At what point did they realize you had a traumatic brain injury too? As you said, the helmet was ripped off your head, you broke your neck. Was that overlooked at first?
It was. I think even to this day, there's a little misunderstanding of brain injury. In order to qualify as a severe traumatic brain injury, which is what I had, you have to have a period of over 7 days of loss of consciousness or memory. And I was in a comatose state for 2 weeks with no memory. So there absolutely was a very serious brain injury, as you can imagine, from that ejection into that sound barrier and all the other physical damage it did. However, it really went overlooked initially. And as I progressed in my rehabilitation, it actually kind of did me a favor, because had they acknowledged that TBI early on, it would have kept me from ever getting to get back and fly. So it was actually in my benefit initially that they kind of didn't see it.
So you're doing the physical therapy and all the therapies. In your mind, are you thinking, not only am I going to walk again, I'm going to fly again?
Yeah, that was my goal. I was visualizing like what it's going to be like when I climb back into the cockpit. What's it going to be like to put on my flight suit and G-suit and all this gear again? And I could see myself doing it, and that's kind of what kept me driving forward.
So you still had that going on, but were the drugs affecting the rest of your mental state or your personality?
Oh yeah, they were very draining. While I was dealing with some pretty severe nerve pain, and that's why I was taking all these meds. And actually one day while I was in the Polytrauma Center in Richmond, this doc shows up. He had a lab coat, but he had like long hippie hair. He didn't have the same vibe as the VA docs, you know, and I don't know if he was even supposed to be there, but he kind of snuck in the room, and he had this little leather bag with him, and he's like, I have something I think you might want to try. I was like, okay. And he had to whip out this waiver, and I had to sign it, which I didn't have to sign any waiver to be on all the other meds I was on. So I was like, oh, man, what is this stuff? This has got to be really potent. And all he did is he pulled out a bag of glucose, so just a bag of sugar water in an IV bag, and a syringe, like an insulin syringe. And he plugged the glucose bag, and he pulled out and filled the syringe. And then he just went around all the areas where I had the severe nerve pain and spasms and just the stuff that was destroying my sleep and making me miserable all day. Like, no kidding, like 10 out of 10 pain when this would strike. It would feel like someone was electrocuting me or crushing my toes or lighting them on fire, all of those together. And in about 10 minutes, with a bag of glucose syrup and a syringe, this guy put all these little pockets subcutaneously, so little mosquito bites all over my foot and leg and all the areas I was experiencing that pain. And almost immediately, that pain vanished. And it never came back. 95% of that pain never returned.
While you were in one of those centers or facilities you were in, you said that the pharmaceutical companies would approach veterans. It would have been a veterans facility, and they would sign a waiver, and they would be guinea pigs then. They would do clinical trials.
Yeah.
How did that work?
Oh, and that therapy they did was called prolotherapy for anybody that may be dealing with nerve pain. Prolotherapy, highly recommend. But yeah, they would absolutely come in, and they did it very cleverly. They had these beautiful young women, like very nicely dressed, that would come and flirt with you. And, you know, you're a veteran that's stuck in here with a bunch of other sweaty dudes, like doing therapy all day. And now all of a sudden this beautiful woman wants to come and interact with you. They were very successful in getting recruits for these trials. And, you know, you sign a few waivers, they throw you a few pills and see what happened. And there were times when there were rumors of pretty disastrous effects from some of these trials, and effectively using military members as lab rats. No kidding.
I was going to say, with the rehab phase, you were in, I think it was Virginia, the Richmond, was a VA facility, and they're pumping you up with all these drugs. You're left inside, you don't go outside. These are things I know that you later discovered you need for healing. And nutrition. And you said the food there was, you just described it in your book. You think, oh my, you poor thing, I just felt sorry for you. So you're trying to recover in a medical facility, and they're just feeding you slop that's like chipped in from an hour away.
Yeah, basically, just about anything that you need to actually heal was scarce or impossible to find while you're in a facility designed for healing people from severe injury. While there's all these therapists, there's all this equipment, there's this optics of everything being very nicely run, there's fresh paint on the walls and nice corporate art, and if you walk through the facility, you go, wow, I can't believe the veterans are getting this. And compared to what previous generations of veterans received when they came back from a war that they didn't even sign up to fight, received, we are very fortunate where it's at. The VA has made massive strides of improvement. But some of the frustrations there were the fact that you need to sleep. That's probably the most important thing that you need to do to heal. And every hour, 2 hours, somebody's coming into your room, waking you up to take vitals, and then give you medication so you can sleep. It's completely nuts. And then, like as you mentioned, the food was absolutely abysmal, dog food quality crap. I mean, you could get like French fries and fried chicken legs and these things that were like microwave pizzas, basically. But a lot of the food that came, and I describe it in my book, but there was this one meal that I jokingly called the holiday feast, which was, it was like sliced deli meat turkey that had gone near rancid, like it was on the half-off rack kind of stuff, kind of slimy to the touch. There was like a film that would come off of it if you touched it. And that was the main entree. Don't worry, it gets better. There's also mashed potatoes that were not mashed potatoes. They had come from a box that the astronauts maybe used back in 1980. You could still see the chunks of dried stuff in it. There was a gelatinous disc on top of all of this, in the shape of like a can of cat food or dog food. Like someone took a can of this stuff and just plopped it on top. That was supposed to be the gravy. And then as a side kicker, you got this, it just said cranberry on it. It was just a white plastic ketchup packet that just said cranberry. And when you opened it, it was just like a purple jelly that squirted out. So that's the kind of food that we were eating when we're trying to heal our body and recover, which is obviously not going to do you a lot of favors.
Happy Thanksgiving, huh?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Now that everybody's so hungry.
So I hope if you haven't read the book that you do, because I said it really moves. Where did you learn to write, by the way? Because this is the National Writers Series, and you have a great story, inspirational and amazing. But on top of it all, you're a great writer.
Thank you. I was not like a naturally gifted writer. I was actually not a good English student. I wasn't a very good student at all when I was in high school. I was pretty distracted and did not like being in a classroom, period. But later in life, well, one, I had to get exposed to a tremendous amount of very technical, dense language reading and briefing, which I think helped to develop my language skills. Just being in the fighter community, you have to digest tremendous amounts of information and then be able to not only brief it in front of people who've been doing this for decades and sound intelligent, but then you have to take it and apply it into a jet real time going 600 miles per hour. So that process of that, taking in so much information and being able to put it back out there and articulate it, I think helped me develop my writing. And when I started writing, I wasn't a great writer by any means. I mean, I don't know how many drafts I went through. Like, I didn't just sit down with a quill and a scroll and like write this thing out in beautiful language that was just perfect. Like, I had to go through this very long process and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And I had the benefit of having Microsoft Word and Grammarly that's like spell check on steroids help me out. I had my friend Austin Rolander, who's another Northern Michigan author who wrote the book Ordinary Time. If you want to read something really funny, I highly recommend it. But he's my neighbor, and him and I helped edit each other's books going back and forth. Another friend of mine, Janessa Belay, just volunteered to read through it. She's a teacher, and she went through and did some revisions. And so over time, like, this thing just grew and grew. And like I said, I've probably done at least 100 revisions where I would read it and then I would rewrite the sentence. How do I make this sound better? How do I make this sound cool? What would be a good word for this? And then plus I also had editorial staff through my publisher. So initially I had a developmental editor sit down with me, which was largely just cutting a lot of it away. Because I had quite a bit more in there, but they really helped me arc the storyline to keep readers engaged and recommend, like, hey, here's a character that you need to elaborate more on. Here's some characters that we can kind of take out. So they helped me kind of develop it to make it flow really well. And then the last step was I had another editor go through and do all the really nitty-gritty stuff and get it up to the Chicago Writer's Manual or whatever it is. So to get all the little, like, what type of quotation marks, are they the straight or the curly ones? Like, how do we get this thing like really dialed in? So it wasn't just me that wrote that, but I think just getting to be with it for years and have all the support helped me develop it into what it came out as.
It's an amazing story as we go through. We won't have time, but I don't want to give everything away. But that whole process, the rehab centers, the therapy, the hospitals, the different facilities, pumped up with drugs, terrible food, can't sleep, pain that really wasn't being addressed by the painkillers. Some of the staff weren't always that great. But as you read it, he peppers it a little bit with some humor here and there. So I want to go back to that holiday feast that you had, that phase. And one of the problems the medications had on you, the impacts, was you weren't very regular, as they say in the commercials.
Yes.
But there was an outing. I guess once in a while they would take you to an actual restaurant where you could eat real food. So I'll put you on the spot and see if you can share that with us.
Yeah, this is a fun story. I hope nobody gets offended. It's about pooping. But yeah, when you're getting pumped full of all these opioids, it kind of shuts down your digestive system. And it had been weeks since I had had a regular bowel movement. And I had been eating that crappy VA food, kind of my body's in shambles. I'm actually having to get help to use the restroom. I still couldn't even go by myself. But the recreational therapist, for the first time, I got to go out and have a meal outside of the VA. And we got to go to, I think it was like a noodle factory or some little noodle restaurant. And as I walked into this place, and they're wheeling me, I didn't walk in, I was wheeled in a wheelchair. But I just got this overwhelming smell of like, whoa, real food for the first time in a while. And that triggered something within my digestive system. And I was like, I gotta go. So I had an assistant take me to the bathroom and wrestle me onto the toilet. And then I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, like, this is not coming out without a fight, you know? And so I just start yelling, like, this is like giving birth for a man. I am screaming in labor. My face is beet red, like the veins are popping out of my neck and my forehead, like, and this is probably going on for like 5 or 10 minutes, and you can hear the restaurant staff turns up the music to try to drown it out, because it sounds like someone's getting murdered in their bathroom. And anyways, this thing eventually comes out about the size of a hand grenade, and they wheel me back out into the restaurant, and everyone's just kind of like staring at their shoes, you know?
Well, it felt pretty good, I'll bet.
Yeah, I mean, I have like permanent damage now from that experience.
Okay. All right, well, I want to skip over a lot of the
Does that answer your question?
The recovery. There's so much time you were in recovery. The drugs had a terrible impact on you. The whole approach to healing you doesn't seem like it agreed with you very much. But he weaned himself off of all of these highly addictive painkillers, even against the advice of family and medical professionals, just lowering the dose bit by bit, which is an amazing demonstration of your willpower and determination, because they were having a negative impact on you. You eventually discovered, we'll skip over some steps here, you discovered psychedelics, mushrooms, through a veterans group. And this is, by the way, this is after you were diagnosed with the brain injury, which was having a terrible impact on you. Short-term memory loss, hallucinations, all kinds of problems between the brain injury and the drugs they were feeding you. So you've kind of found your own path to recovery. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I kind of had to navigate my own way, because the sort of the way that a lot of the medical system is designed is to get you on a pill and keep you on that pill. And that's the way the business model has been designed. And I know there's a lot of frustration in the world of physicians. Like my friend Colin here's actually ER doc at Munson, and we've talked about this before. It's like, unfortunately, the way the medical system is designed it can be very frustrating, because the physicians are really largely trained to get you on these medications and with no real long-term plan to get you off. And unfortunately, that business model has been overruling the healing of people. And so I was fortunate to have, this stubborn mindset of, well, the docs don't want to help me get off of this stuff, so I'm just going to do it myself. And maybe that wasn't a great idea, but I very slowly titrated myself off the oxycodone, then the OxyContin, then I did the amitriptyline, and then the tramadol, and then the trazodone, and I just little by little did each one individually to where I could tolerate it, and then I got to gabapentin, which I was on 2,400 milligrams of that stuff a day, and that one was incredibly difficult. I was taking these big old, I think they were 600 milligram capsules that I had, and I had to chop them into quarters, and I would take little pieces of them as I slowly lowered the dose. But that one took months and months to get off of. But eventually, I got myself free of all those meds, and the physical improvement and mental improvement that I felt once that stuff was no longer weighing me down were tremendous. Like, I got my vigor back, I got my energy back, and that just helped me charge forward in my recovery and get physically well.
So getting off the drugs, you felt better, kind of more like yourself. And what role did the psychedelics play? And I mean, because that's right now there's a lawmaker in Lansing that has a bill in the House. Last year, a state senator had a bill that didn't get out of committee, but it would permit psychedelics for the treatment of PTSD in veterans under supervision. Some other states, I think, allow that right now, or some cities do. What do you have to say about that? What impact did it have on you?
It was absolutely profound. I was dealing with severe mental health issues later after I had been medically retired from the military. There's a lot more in the story in between there, so if you haven't read the book yet, there's a lot more that goes on. But eventually I was medically retired and started dealing with severe mental health issues, largely related to traumatic brain injury, that still went very much unrecognized. Instead it was very quickly I got a delayed onset PTSD diagnosis, which was maybe a small part of it. But I've largely come to understand that the symptoms of PTS, or post-traumatic stress, are largely associated with injury to the brain at one level or another. And it doesn't have to be an explosive force. It doesn't have to be an ejection into the speed of sound, or it doesn't have to be in combat. These are stressors that can happen to us just through the grind of life. From that time we fell off our bike when we were a kid, to not sleeping as much as we should, working too much, being stressed out, not eating the right foods, drinking too much caffeine or alcohol. These things take a toll over the course of our lives, and I think a lot of mental health conditions can be traced back to a physiological dysfunction in the brain and nervous system. Now again, this was not largely recognized in my case. This is stuff I had to kind of sort out on my own, but I ended up living in a VA inpatient psychiatric facility, and I was on, again, the same journey I went with pain meds. I went with the psychotropic meds for dealing with mental health issues and psychoses. But eventually I stumbled upon psychedelic healing. And I had read a book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And it kind of talks about how you can treat mental health conditions and other health conditions with the use of psychedelics appropriately. And I reached out to a number of nonprofit organizations, and eventually I was invited by an organization called Heroic Hearts Project. And they took me down to Peru. I had to depart from the land of the free to get access to medicine to heal from my injuries incurred while serving my country, which is a little ironic. But once I was down there, I got put in the Amazon rainforest with some Shipibo natives, and I experienced ayahuasca in ceremony with them over the course of 3 separate nights. And not only did this medicine get into me and allow me to access part of my mind that I don't think we can get to without assistance, which is effectively it melted away my perception as a human. My 5 senses were gone, my body was gone, and there's something underneath us that remains when all of those senses and perception are gone. And once I accessed this state, I was able to find this terrified, trapped little boy that was me, trapped in this stillness and pain. But in that stillness and pain, I felt something that I had never truly experienced at my core. And something told me I was loved. And in that moment, that darkness shattered away. My heart erupted. I was reconnected. I felt a sense of connection through everything. I felt connection, purpose, awe radiating through everything and everything around me. And it changed me at my core. And through proper integration support, which is just as important, if not more important than the psychedelic experience itself, which was rebuilding my lifestyle with a focus on sleep, nutrition, movement, meditation, reconnection to nature and community. And through that experience, it started to transform me from within. And not only did my brain and nervous system and body and soul heal, so did my life around me as I got better and better.
Right. And just that one experience had that impact?
The first big one was 3 different nights of ceremony. I also experienced another indigenous medicine called Iboga, which Ibogaine has been in the news a lot lately. There's been a big battle, just one down in Texas, where they're going to actually, I think they've just put $100 million of funding towards researching Ibogaine for treating PTSD and other addiction issues, and it's incredibly beneficial. So I've experienced multiple medicines. Some people will just go do one experience, and they're good, and they never want to touch that stuff again. It's understandable because it can be a very brutal physically and mental experience for people. but the transformation that can occur and the acceleration to the healing process that it provides is tremendous. They're finding a lot of these substances, especially ibogaine and psilocybin, which is from a mushroom, cause rapid neuroregeneration. They increase a protein that our bodies and brains produce when we're little toddlers, when we're learning everything is new. It boosts those levels up to the level that you had when you're a toddler, and it allows the brain and nervous system to regrow rapidly.
So what was the turning point? You were a zombie. You were drugged out on these prescription drugs, kind of just left in your bed, checked every few hours by hospital staff. At some point, you weaned yourself off the painkillers, the addictive drugs. You began to read. I think you mentioned Michael Pollan, I think one of his
Michael
books.
Pollan,
That's why I
yeah.
say Matt pops up again. I think maybe did he recommend one of those books I thought I read? But
Matt actually recommended a book called Finding Ultra by Rich Roll.
But so you started to read these books about nutrition, about recovery. You started to do research because what was being prescribed was not working. What was the turning point where you said, I'm going to take over my own recovery, essentially?
I was in a really dark place for a long time, and my wife, Kara, who's in the crowd tonight, was having to really manage me. And I was just a broken shell of a man in this drug-induced stupor. And everything was hard for me. Every gift around me felt like a burden. And I was just like an old dog that just wanted to wander off into the woods and die alone. And this is a turning point when my friend Matt reached out to me and loaded up my mountain bike, and we went up to Marquette and rode some trails together. And at the end of that trip, he gave me that book, Finding Ultra by Rich Roll, which is this man's journey from, kind of being in this dark place in his life as a corporate attorney and drinking too much and, eating too much and finding himself like very physically and mentally unwell, was able to transform his life through proper nutrition and exercise. And so that kind of set me on a new trajectory, which I credit to Matt. Thank you, brother, for putting me out. Like when you came and you helped save my life of that day that you took me mountain biking. Thank you.
And so also the role that your family played, because while you were in there, like I said, either a zombie or hallucinating and going through a lot of these stages, your wife, Kara, your parents, what role did your family play in your recovery?
Yeah, I don't know if they make a Medal of Honor for a spouse, but Kara is deserving of that and then some. She had to deal with taking over our family when I became incapable of hardly doing the dishes, and just being a miserable human being to be around most of the time. And so my family, they played a pivotal role all throughout with supporting. So my little baby boy could be around me. Like when I got transferred down to Battle Creek inpatient psychiatric facility when I was dealing with severe mental health issues, Kara loaded up our little baby boy in our car and drove down to Battle Creek and found what we could find and afford, not knowing how long we would be there. And she ended up living in this crappy, dingy little motel as our 1-year-old baby boy is trying to learn how to walk. She had to go to the nearby Walmart or Kmart and get a mop and cleaning supplies to clean the motel that they were at to get the grime off the floor. And so she just went through hell for years of that and years. And then, for a while, the only thread that was holding our relationship together was her fear, a very valid fear, that if we did get divorced, I might get some partial custody of our children and harm them in another unpredictable psychoses. And so she was really living in a trapped hell. And for being the free spirit that she is, that grew up sailing around the Caribbean on a sailboat and just being a free human being, this really drug her through a chapter of life that I think she'd rather forget. But I'm still here because of the support of the family, friends, and my wife that came around me in my time of need.
So, you grow up in Traverse City, you get the bug through NMC's Youth Aviation, that first Cessna ride, and somehow you didn't think you were material or that you had the connections to go to officer candidate school. You did. You figured out a way. You got through that tough academic and pilot curriculum, passed all the tests, went through all the training, got your wings, got to fly the F-18 Super Hornet, Navy, and crashed, had the ejection. Your life pretty much could have been over. I mean, if you would have followed the protocol, you might never have walked again. But because of that determination, first thing you said was, I'll walk again. You did. And did you fly again?
I did. I went back to be an active duty Super Hornet pilot after the ejection.
Yeah. So, an amazing journey there. And I think you now speak to audiences. What is some of the message you have based on your life as far as what you've accomplished?
Some of the big messages that I speak on are, one, how resilient the human body and spirit can be, and also that in those darkest moments, you can often find some of the greatest virtues of humanity. And you oftentimes have to go through those hardships to develop that and find out your real character and who you are. And now I look back on all this hardship and struggle that I've been through, and I'm grateful for it because it helped evolve me to the person that I am here today standing before you. So there's a Carl Jung quote that I really love that kind of sums up one of my big messages when I speak, which is, no tree can grow to the heavens without roots into hell.
All right, now the question everybody's been wondering about, how did you get your nickname?
Oh, man.
SMURF.
Save the best for
Now,
last.
We have an adult audience. I think we can do this. Are we off the video feed? No, we're okay. No, but first of all of you aviators, naval aviators, you all have nicknames for each other?
We do. It's an old tradition that goes back to the very beginning of military aviation and maybe before that. But yeah, once you're in a squadron and they get to know you, they typically bestow a call sign on you, which is oftentimes the most embarrassing thing that you've ever done, or something embarrassing about your physical features. At least in the Navy, it's not done because it sounds cool. I know there's some communities in the Air Force where you get to pick your own call sign and it's what you think sounds cool. That's not how it's done in the Navy. I had been in my squadron, my first fleet squadron, VFA 143, the Pukin Dogs, flying F-18s for almost a year. I'd already done the 4+ years of flight training to get to that point, and I still didn't have a call sign because I had just been the guy who had little tiny mouth, big ears, put my head down, grinded, got my job done, and I just didn't stick out in any way. And actually on the day of my ejection, January 15, 2014, one of the more senior pilots in the squadron, call sign Basil, came up to me and he said, "And you just haven't done anything dumb enough to earn a call sign yet." And about an hour after that conversation, I was in the ocean fighting for my life, having just put a $89 million jet into the drink. But they had rescued me from the ocean, and I had been in a coma for going on 2 weeks. And a lot of my squadron mates, including Basil, who had made that comment, are waiting in the ICU waiting room, just waiting to hear if I'm going to be a vegetable, am I going to wake up again? And Basil kind of piped up and goes, he's a scrappy motherfucker. He'll be all right. And the way he got the name Scrappy was actually, when you go into the military, you have, and you go to your first active fleet squadron, you have to fill out this form, and it gets sealed, and then it goes into the commanding officer's desk. And if anything were to ever happen to you, they pull out this letter, and they read it, and on that has a name, and it's who you want to be contacted if there's an emergency. And I had actually put Matt as my contact point because I thought he would be like a cool, level-headed guy to deal with crisis. And so my commanding officer actually calls Matt and explains that I had been injured, and Matt's reaction was like, "Scrappy? You mean Scrappy?" And so, because that was my nickname when I was a kiteboard instructor, for obvious reasons. And anyway, so my commanding officer comes back into the ICU waiting room and starts saying, "Scrappy, that's pretty funny." And so Basil says, "He's a scrappy motherfucker. He'll be all right." Yeah. And because it's the military, you have to have a politically correct cover story for anything like that. So they said I was a short guy that turned blue from hypothermia is the official reason.
Yeah, that's the official reason.
But now you know it's actually a makeshift acronym.
SMURF. Scrappy. Well, they get most of the letters in order there.
Yeah, okay. It's kind of an acronym.
Well, I think we are maybe at the juncture where we can do some questions if anybody has any questions. Meanwhile, before that though, Really, I hope you do read the book because it's just a great true story. It's a Traverse City guy, served our country proud, and great lessons in there. So, thank you, Kegan, Lieutenant, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For this tonight and for the book and for your story. Thank you.
Of course, Ron. Anytime.
So I think we'll do a question. If you shout it out loud, just so we can hear it, I'll repeat it so everybody can. So I think we had right over there in the front row.
I just want to thank you for your service.
My pleasure.
And my brother's a 22-year Marine. My brother-in-law is a 2-year Marine. And after seeing what my brother's gone through, my brother-in-law went through, and others in the service, I can only thank you. It is people like you who take care of people like us. And I think that's an incredible story to get that, you know. Just got that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure.
If you didn't hear that, that gentleman thanked Kegan for his service and said he has relatives in the Marines and just thanked him for what he does for us. Great stories. Thank you. Also over here. Sir, yep.
So 2014, right, was the accident. When did you consider yourself to be, we're never back to normal, but when did you consider yourself to hit the normal stage? And I look forward to reading the book, by the way.
So-
Just give me that little synopsis here.
So 2014, January 15th was the accident. Question is, when do you figure you were back to normal?
So yeah, there was this pretty miraculous physical rehabilitation that took place over the course of 2 years. And almost exactly 2 years from the date of that accident, I was able to max out the Navy's physical fitness test again. So physically I felt great, and mentally I was feeling good. But as time went on in that flying career, it took a toll. The high G's, high stress, smashing onto aircraft carriers, getting catapulted off, all that stuff takes a toll on the physiology of the brain. And so later in my career, I started to struggle more on the mental health side of things, which I won't ruin everything for the book, but yeah, it was about 2 years where physically I was feeling great.
It's another good chapter, learning how to land on an aircraft carrier. Yep. Let's see, questions, anybody? Yes. Question is, were they able to recover the jet, and did they change any of the protocols in the helmet that you wear?
So about the largest piece of the aircraft that they recovered was about the size of a crumpled up license plate. That thing had basically vaporized upon impact. It hit the ocean at about a 51 degrees nose-low dive angle at over 700 miles per hour. And so that jet just vaporized into nothing. As far as corrective actions, there was a very in-depth field naval aviator evaluation board that took place after my mishap, which happens anytime there's an aircraft mishap of that magnitude, where they do a very in-depth analysis of what went wrong and why. So that not I think maybe more so in the commercial aviation world, that's an opportunity to hang the pilot out to dry. In the military, if you do something blatantly stupid or illegal, or you have some sort of drug or alcohol in your system and you make a mistake like that, it's one thing. But for the most part, they just want to learn what happened, what went wrong, and how they can prevent it from happening again. And in that investigation, some big parts that they took away. One was there is a system on the aircraft called the G limiter, and that system can protect the aircraft from overstress of the wings when it interprets their bombs on the wings, which is actually what my aircraft did, is it thought there were bombs on the wings that weren't actually there, and so it limited how aggressively I could maneuver it. So they actually changed some of the software so that you could see in the cockpit and manipulate those loadouts in a way that you couldn't do previously. So that change took place. My recommendation was that we actually put people in a simulator and you put them in the same situation so they can practice recovering from that. There's kind of a cheat code that you can do to the control stick to override that G limiter function if it's if it's intuitive and you practice it. However, it's not something that we practice at the time, and by the time it took me, just the delay of recognizing what was going wrong, it was too late. But if you could be in that situation and immediately know what was going on because you had trained to that situation, I could have hit a paddle switch and pulled the jet out of that dive and maybe saved it before it hit the ocean. That was my recommendation. Unfortunately, there has not been a whole lot else changed. I know another pilot who was at the pinnacle of his career. He had just graduated the Top Gun weapons course, which is incredibly challenging. He was a very proficient and capable pilot, was doing a low level in a canyon out in California, and he ended up smashing into the canyon wall because of that same system. And it had killed and caused mishaps prior to me and much more experienced pilots. So unfortunately, that system in the F-18 Super Hornet has largely remained unchanged.
As a Traverse City kid, inspired by NMC Aviation, the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds who've flown here for the Cherry Festival, did they inspire you in any way to pursue that?
They did, you know, as a little kid being at the Cherry Fest and seeing the Blue Angels blast over and blow out the windows back when they flew lower and faster. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that stuck with me as a little kid. I always had these mental barriers in my own mind. Like, there's no way I could ever do that.
Amazing. Time for a few more questions. Yes, sir, in the back.
Kegan, has anybody reached out to talk to you about film rights? This would be great.
About what?
Film rights. Film rights.
He asked if anybody's
Film
reached
rights.
out about film rights. And yes, they have. I've had several folks call me and talk to me and email me. I just haven't had anybody bite yet and sign a contract. But it's out there. If anybody knows anybody who makes movies, I think this would be a good one.
Tom Cruise might be a little too old to play you. You might need
He keeps getting younger.
Okay. Let's right in the front row over there.
Yes, thank you for sharing your story and sounding the alarm on the importance for the need for holistic health care. I work in acute care psychiatric, and it's the same approach, the one size fits all, meds, and it's heartbreaking. So promoting concepts like resiliency, growing in virtue, those are huge to patients. And I'm wondering, have you ever spoken in schools to like high school, junior high?
Have you ever spoken in schools? Somebody appreciates his holistic approach to health recovery. Have you spoken to students?
I have. I've actually done a high school commencement ceremony. I've spoken at universities prior. I'm actually going to go speak in Georgia at another university coming up this summer. But yeah, I've absolutely spoken to young children, and really my message with them is the importance of just taking care of your health through your lifestyle with a prioritization of getting good sleep. We need 8 hours of sleep a night, and when you don't get that, you can get by for a while, but it will take a toll and accelerate the deterioration of your mind and body, as well as just nutrition, eating healthy foods, avoiding the processed junk that unfortunately plagues the grocery store shelves these days, and then just getting some form of movement and exercise, ideally in nature. But these are the fundamental things that maybe our grandparents told us about, but I'd like to just reiterate like how crucial it is and how paramount it is that the young people focus on that as part of their life.
Yes, sir.
What was the name of the IV therapy that helped your nerve pain?
What was the name of the IV therapy that helped your nerve pain?
That's a great question. It was called prolotherapy. Prolotherapy. I think it's Prolo therapy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir.
I do have a question for Lieutenant Gill, but I wanted to acknowledge Mr. Jolly's excellence at interviewing. I've heard many interviews on creating the show.
Thank you. That's it? Oh, thank you. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, he does have a question too.
You do have a question.
So the shark didn't get you when you went to drink, but neither did hypothermia, and I'm kind of shocked about that.
Yeah, the sharks didn't get him, but he was in 37-degree water, and hypothermia he said didn't get you.
Yeah, it was truly miraculous. I was wearing a dry suit when I ejected. However, I had ejected so fast that the dry suit shredded apart, and it just became like a big sea anchor. So once I plummeted into the water, that thing just filled up with the cold water, which maybe provided a little bit of a thermal barrier, but I spent about 2 hours in the ocean before I was picked up by a helicopter and brought to the Level 1 Trauma Center. And once they got me there, they took my core body temperature, and I was at 87 degrees Fahrenheit core body temperature after having been in a heated helicopter cabin for about 40 minutes on that ride. So I was severely hypothermic, but they also said had I not had that level of hypothermia, which almost did kill me within a degree of certain death, but they said that I would have bled out because I had a torn brachial artery and I had 2 open leg fractures from my tibias just ripping through the skin. So I was bleeding pretty profusely, and they said the hypothermia actually saved me from bleeding out. And also helped to preserve brain function.
Wow. All right, let's see. I want to just over there. Yes.
Thank you.
Through all your therapies, did anybody offer hyperbaric treatment or therapy?
So it wasn't until years later, and still the VA will not allow hyperbaric oxygen therapy for people dealing with traumatic brain injury, which is completely bonkers to me because it's very effective treatment. Through the generous offer, or generosity is the word I'm trying to say, through the generosity of a couple down in Austin, Texas, Clay and Eleanor Womack, they run a ATX hyperbaric facility there in Westlake Medical Arts, and they completely donated about $25,000 worth of treatment to me. So my wife, my 2 kids, and I drove down to Austin, and we spent a month down there a couple years back. And through that, I got to experience not only hyperbaric oxygen therapy, they were giving me very nice supplementation that boosted my natural stem cell production, one called Stem Regen. It's about $300 for a bottle, and they were giving me one of those every week to take in conjunction with the HBOT therapy. But what that did is it just like completely rebooted my system, accelerated nerve growth, blood vessel redevelopment, neuroregeneration, and I had just come off of another psychedelic experience, so I had like the triple whammy going to help my brain and nervous system heal. But I highly recommend hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and that should be a standard protocol for traumatic brain injury.
One follow-up. Has anybody written medical papers to support what benefited you?
The question was, has anybody written medical papers to support what has benefited me? And I think individually there's been some onesie-twosies of some of this stuff. And I don't think that there is a lot of financial interest from the pharmaceutical industry to really propagate a lot of this, because this is all direct conflict or direct competition with their business model, which is we want to give you a pill that you have to take the rest of your life, and then some other pills to go along with it. And a lot of the things that I have experienced have actually been getting fought by the FDA and shut down and made unavailable. And there is currently a silent battle going on where the FDA has been made the enforcement arm of the pharmaceutical industry. And they've been weaponized against things that can actually help your health. The very agency that's supposed to be safeguarding our health is instead a revolving door of pharmaceutical workers, where you will develop a pharmaceutical drug. You will then go work at the FDA to get that pharmaceutical drug approved, and then you go back to the pharmaceutical company. And this happens again and again and again, and it's just a very incestuous relationship that has kind of devolved yet another of our federal agencies.
All right, let's see. We'll go over here. Yes, sir.
Has anybody from the VA contacted you to see what they can learn from your poor experience in healthcare there?
Anybody from the VA contact you to see what they can learn from your experience?
I haven't had anybody from the VA contact me directly, although I was at a conference last week in Denver talking about alternative modalities for mental health and brain health, and I met several physicians from the VA system, and they are gearing up and preparing to be able to offer psychedelic assisted therapy through the VA. They're trying to get ahead of it, so when it does get approved, which is largely in the hands of the FDA, which they have continually to shut down these studies in approval for obvious reasons with their financial ties that we just discussed. But fortunately, the VA docs are just as fed up as anybody, and they're getting ready to be able to treat people when it becomes legal.
All right, I think that will wrap up this portion of the program. Oh, we have one more. We'll go one more way in the back there.
I must compliment you on your presentation. I think you are an elegant speaker.
Thank you.
Getting your points across, people are listening and paying attention, and we should all learn something from what you've had to say tonight.
All right.
Thank
Way to
you so
wrap it up.
much. Thank you.
Couple of announcements. First of all, thanks to the National Writers Series for putting on these great programs. Check out their website for all the upcoming authors, but it's a real gift to Traverse City to bring these wonderful programs together. Coming up next, Adriana Trigiani, paying homage to family roots. She writes about food, I believe. The View from Lake Como. July 16th, read more about it in the program or on the website. Also, Kegan will go out, and if you have a book, if you want it personalized or as a gift, he'll be signing out there. But I think right now we want to take a photo, I'm told, with Kegan standing with his back to you so we can get a picture of everybody with Kegan in it. So you're going to go up, stand there. I'm going to get out of the way. And if you do have a book, hold it up so people can see the copy. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for this special presentation from the National Writers Series. Coming up Wednesday, July 16th at 7 p.m., don't miss an evening with author Adriana Trigiani and her 21st book, The View from Lake Como. It's everything an immersive summer read should be. It's funny and heart-wrenching, with perfectly imperfect characters that readers will feel deeply connected to. She's even been knighted by the Order of the Star of Italy for her outstanding contributions promoting goodwill and positivity about her family's home country. Tickets are available now. Go to nationalwriterseries.org.